For our first example of a living weapon, we go to Japan. Widely regarded as the finest swordsmith in Japanese history, Goro Myudo Masamune's blades were prized for their sharpness, strength, and beauty. While a warrior's sword was often referred to as the soul of the samurai, in the case of a Masamune blade, it may have been literally true. According to legend, his swords were capable of both discretion and a sense of justice, as if they were sentient creatures. This is best illustrated by an apocryphal account of a contest between Masamune and another great swordsmith of history, Sengo Muramasa. I refer to the contest as apocryphal for reasons we'll get to later. The legend is that Muramasa challenged the elder Masamune to a contest to see which of them could make the finer sword. Both masters went to work and eventually produced stunning blades of very fine quality. But how to settle which of the two was better? They finally agreed on the following method. The blades would be placed point down and side by side in a small stream, with their edges turned upstream. Whichever blade was better at slicing through the water would be declared the winner. A traveling Buddhist priest was engaged as judge. Their respective blades were arranged as agreed and the contest was on. The difference in the swords was apparent from the start. The stream flowed around Masamune's blade with barely a ripple. When a leaf floated against the edge, it rolled off and continued its journey downstream, untouched, as if nothing had happened. A fish swimming downstream would pass the edge of Masamune's blade without harm, even if it had touched the steel in its haste. By contrast, the stream flowed past Muramasa's blade with a gurgling sound. If a leaf so much as touched it, the blade would split it in two. As for the fish, they fared no better than the leaf. The stream was stained with blood more than once. Muramasa was overjoyed, certain he had won because, as he said, his blade cut everything. Masamune and the priestly judge disagreed, declaring that Masamune had won, and for the very same reason. Masamune's blade cut nothing that did not deserve to be cut, while Muramasa's blade cut everything, indiscriminately. Masamune's blade, while still sharp, had a spirit of discretion and justice, while Muramasa's blade was bloodthirsty and cruel, and so was the inferior blade. So in essence, who won the contest depends on your point of view. Now we get to the apocryphal part mentioned earlier. This legendary contest never happened. We know it never happened because Masamune lived in the late 13th and early 14th centuries. Muramasa wasn't even born until the 16th century. That said, the story also illustrates a widely understood and accepted myth regarding both makers and their swords which persists to the present day. It was believed that the first Tokugawa shogun, Ieyasu, would not allow anyone to come near him bearing a Muramasa sword, partly because his grandfather had been cut down by a Muramasa blade, but also because Muramasa blades were believed to be both bloodthirsty and often treacherous, something that was never said of a Masamune blade. The only problem with this legend, as with the cutting contest, was that it also never happened. History shows that many of the shogun's closest retainers bore Muramasa blades, and the shogun owned at least two himself. The idea that Muramasa blades were cursed developed later in the samurai era, and stories arose to reinforce and explain why. While legends are almost always true in the symbolic and representational sense, they are not always true in the factual sense. Speaking of which, there's also a mystery associated with the most famous Masamune blade of all, the Honjo Masamune. This sword was owned by the head of the Tokugawa family and surrendered to the American authorities as required after World War II ended. It was then allegedly spirited away by an American soldier, or someone disguised as one, and is missing to this day. If you happen across it, please let people know. It's considered a national treasure of Japan, and I'm sure they'd like it back. For the next example of a living weapon, we turn to the Finnish epic story cycle, the Kalevala. There we find the legend of Ilmarinen the immortal smith and his wonderful bow. Ilmarinen was a figure with many parallels to the Hephaestos of Greek legend. He was extremely skilled at the forge and extremely unlucky in love. He apparently was so desperate at one point he attempted to make a wife out of gold and silver, but could not quite manage to make her come to life. His bow, however, was another matter. It was alleged to be one of the most perfect bows ever made, imbued with magical power as a weapon and crafted with unrivaled beauty, simply as an object. Unfortunately, something went wrong with the bow. And to fully explain how it went wrong, we need to introduce a character named Louhi, ruler of the north country of Pohjola. Louhi was a powerful witch, often at odds with the heroes of the Kalevala, but she had beautiful daughters who were often wooed by them, including Ilmarinen. Louhi delighted in setting impossible tasks for the suitors to thwart them, such as plowing a field of adders or catching a giant pike without hook or net. Yet Ilmarinen, sometimes with the secret aid and advice of his intended, completed Louhi's tasks and won his bride. Yet his bride passed as a result of a herdsman's petty revenge, and so Ilmarinen was soon alone again. One thing should be clear. Ilmarinen's bow was created while he was also creating a magical mill called a sampo that created salt, gold, and grain. He made it for Louhi as part of his agreement that won Louhi's daughter, though in one version of the tale, the daughter turned him down, probably for the best. Yet the bow itself was essentially born corrupted, and one theory is that Louhi, jealous of his skill or for some other unfathomable reason, placed a curse on Ilmarinen's magical bow as it was being forged. Considering how his marriage to her daughter turned out, maybe she was just being preemptive. Or maybe Louhi had nothing to do with it, and the very act of creating the sampo used up all the available luck. Besides the bow, Ilmarinen created other wonderful objects in the process of creating the sampo, such as a magic boat, a golden cow, and a golden plow. All except the sampo were badly flawed in some way that made them useless. As for the bow itself, like one of Muramasa's swords, it began to crave blood and go out of its way to get it, whether the situation required it or not. It had to take the life of at least one warrior a day, and two on some days, in order to be satisfied. Ilmarinen finally had enough and broke the cursed bow into pieces and returned it to the forge to be melted down, thus breaking the curse but losing his wonderful magic bow. At last we come to Ireland, when the land was ruled by the magical people called the children of the goddess Danu. They were originally invaders who took over Ireland by defeating a race called the Farbolg in the first battle of Mag Tuired. They were then invaded in turn by the Fomorians, who were either a magical race from beneath the sea or a group of seafaring giants, depending on which version of the story is told. King Tethro was the leader of the Fomorians, who bore a powerful magical sword known as Orna. Yet despite its power, the Fomorians were defeated at the second battle of Mag Tuired, where King Tethra fell. The Fomorians were then driven back into the sea. After the fighting, a hero of the children of Danu named Oma recovered the sword Orna from the battlefield. Yet no sooner had he picked it up than the sword began to talk, giving its own account of the day's fight. It turned out that the sword Orna was intelligent and apparently thrived on recounting its adventures and past deeds. This suited Oma just fine, as he was the children of Danu's god of learning, and Orna was a chatty treasure trove of information, if not exactly loyalty.